Hey there, folks. Welcome to the Wednesday edition of the Whitfield Report. I am your host, Sam Whitfield, recording this from NGC Studios. Technically, I'm recording this on Tuesday night here before I go to bed, but this is the Wednesday edition. So I hope you all are doing well wherever you are listening to this in the past, present, future hour. And a couple quick housekeeping things. First off, ladies and gentlemen, I want to apologize, or rather let you know that the Whitfield Report Saturday edition, that podcast, the file on that for whatever reason got corrupted. I was not able to download that from YouTube, and ladies and gentlemen, I simply haven't had the chance to fix that yet this week, just because I've been busy with school and whatnot, and I might not be able to get to that podcast, to be honest. There's a lot of stuff that, needs to happen. I've tried fixing some stuff with downloading the video file from YouTube, but, that's why there was no podcast episode on Saturday. So I didn't skip an episode. I posted the Gamma Hug Box podcast on Monday. The live stream of that was on Friday, but I posted the audio on Monday. So for those of you who were wondering what was up with that, that's what happened. And like I said, I will try to upload Saturday's show if I can, but it was 4 hours long. And, usually when I do longer podcasts like that, YouTube can be a bit sketchy at like letting you download them for whatever reason. And I've been having a good way to record like the longer podcasts like that. But it is what it is. I'm not worried about it. You're here for the Wednesday edition. So let's get right down to it. And today's topic, ladies and gentlemen, is one that I've touched on a little bit over the past few weeks. But it's something I haven't really discussed quite in depth yet, and it's one I feel needs to be covered. I talked a little bit about it last Monday on the Periscope stream when I announced the Patreon page. I did a podcast episode last week, and I titled it, "Where Do We Go From Here?" And this is kind of continuation of that, so to speak. And I guess the title of this podcast would be what happens after the election. And here's the bottom line. I'm going to get my point out the gate at the top. The point is, we don't really know who's going to win the election right now. It's either going to be Joe Biden or Donald Trump. And if you know me, and you're a long-time listener to the podcast, you probably know which side I am rooting for. Obviously, most of the people listening to this program are more than likely favorable of Trump over Biden like I am, right? And, I don't really need to explain why I think Trump needs to win. I mean, we've seen that, right? With Antifa and, Black Lives Matter, some of the more radical protests out there. There's a lot of stuff that the left wing is pulling that is, in my mind, more dangerous than anything that the left could be claiming about the right wing, right? With us being white supremacists and, neo-Nazis and whatnot. That's an old, game that the left has played, that the radical left has played, for the past probably, well, ever since Trump ran for president in like late 2015 and in 2016, to be honest. And it was a smear tactic then, and it's a smear tactic now. But regardless, I don't want to get off on a Trump tangent here, because there are radical factions on both sides, right? Antifa's bad, and so are the more radical elements of Black Lives Matter. And to be even more frank, I would say that the vast majority of Black Lives Matter as an organization, they do promote Marxism, and they do promote ideologies that I and many of my listeners find, not only repugnant, but quite harmful as well. And there's no getting around that. And my biggest fear with Biden isn't so much that he himself is a radical. I think he is, but more than that, the biggest fear I have with Joe Biden is that clearly the man has, some sort of dementia. He's not all there. And if he were to become president, I feel like he could become the puppet, essentially, of whatever AOC and Ilhan Omar and basically the quasi-communist faction of the DNC. They'll basically be running the show, and Kamala Harris is essentially one of them. And if Joe Biden becomes, president, or if, and then passes away, or something happens and he's incapacitated, then she'll be running the country, as president, and she'll be, she's part of that whole gang with AOC and Ilhan Omar. So we will literally have the most radical of the radical left running the country, basically, and that's not good. But again, I don't want to get off on a tangent about that point. My point with that being is, one of two things is going to happen. Either Trump is going to win re-election, and he'll serve for another 4 years. And again, I know everyone is hoping, at least in this audience, for the most part, everyone is hoping that is going to happen, right? But there's a chance that, there's a very good chance that might not happen. There's a very good chance that Biden will become the next president of the United States. And the polls are so fractured right now that depending on which one you look at, Biden's going to win the whole thing, or Trump is going to win the whole thing, and he's like secretly ahead somehow. But this brings me to the bigger, broader topic of this show, right? Either way, we're going to have a president after election, and in either case, the country is going to be deeply polarized, if not even more so, I feel. Barack Obama did fundamentally change America, folks. And I don't lay it solely at his feet for the problems. I think social media had a lot to do with this too when it came out. But things are definitely more polarized. And so it's hard for me to see a situation where the country is going to come together and unite and find common ground. And I thought that with COVID and everything going on, I thought that maybe, COVID would be the second 9/11, because as horrible as 9/11 was, 9/11 did unify the country, as a whole for, quite a number of years actually. Before everything became really, toxic, there was an American unity after 9/11 that, now we can only dream of, if we're being honest. And it's sad. But the reality is, I don't think we're going to get that type of unity back now, if ever. But with all that being said, like I said, one day, soon, in just a few weeks, either Trump is going to be reelected or Joe Biden is going to be newly elected. And one side is going to be extremely pissed off, and the others are going to be celebrating. So my question to you in this listening audience is, how is that going to affect you and your mental state and mental well-being and emotional well-being? I'm assuming that, most of us here are conservative, or at least conservatarian. So, even if you don't directly support Trump, if you're more like a libertarian type, you don't like other candidate, I get that. But most libertarians, even, I would say, if you give them the option between Trump or Biden, and you say you can't opt out of it, you have to choose either one, most oftentimes they're going to choose Trump. So let's just assume that the entire audience for this, for the purpose of this podcast, let's assume that my entire audience is supporting Trump for this scenario, right? A lot of people have been saying that Trump is going to win, in a landslide on the right. And I hope to God that happens. But what if it doesn't? I'm not necessarily worried about right-wingers going out and doing anything bad, like, rioting or protesting. And I don't see conservatives doing that necessarily. I don't see any members of this audience necessarily doing anything violent. But I don't see unification between Republicans and Democrats coming back. And that concerns me. Because politics, at this point, folks, it's become personal for so many people. And I mean, I guess it always has, but it's gotten to the point where now politics cannot be separated from anything. Right? You turn on the NFL, it's all Black Lives Matter and, politics and, a lot of athletes are becoming, activists as well. And it's a free country, they have the right to do so. But, sports used to be a form of escapism. Same with the movies to a certain extent, right? Even though they were, pushing a more, left-wing message, they've always kind of done that. It was more hidden, but now it's like completely out in the open now. Right? And then the right has kind of thankfully dominated the internet space, so to speak. Right? A lot of us who are either conservative or conservative libertarian, we've kind of filled the podcast space, for better or for worse. Right? But here's the thing. At some point, we have to interact with each other in a society. We have to interact with our family members and our neighbors who may or may not, agree with each other's political stances. And so, this brings up something that I've been thinking about a lot, that I can't really even articulate, but it's just the idea that my advice to you, ladies and gentlemen, is to treat people with decency and to treat people with respect as best you can after the election, regardless of the results. Right? That would be my big request of this audience. My other big request is to not let the election results get you down on the off chance that Biden wins. That's what I've spent the last 18 minutes trying to build up to say, but let's just rip off this Band-Aid here. What I'm trying to say is, if Biden wins, right, and you're a conservative member of this audience, are you going to be able to actually handle it? I would think a lot of people would say yes. I would hope so. But maybe not. And so I want to bring up that possibility of Biden winning, and there's a very good chance of that happening, so that you guys can mentally prepare for that possibility. And I believe that by doing that, we're less likely to have, and I'm not saying we ever would have, the screaming in the sky SJW types, but let me tell you this. It would definitely be a shocker. How do I know this? Because in 2012, after Benghazi happened, after the left tried to take our guns away, post Sandy Hook. After all of that, Benghazi was the main thing for me, but, there were other instances. The Trayvon Martin handling by Obama, one of the first big, gaps in kind of racial division of the country. After all of that, just in 2012 alone, I thought that Obama would for sure be done. His approval rating prior to the election wasn't that great from what I remember. And so, yeah, I wasn't a big fan of Mitt Romney, but had I been able to vote in that election, I was still 17 at the time, I would have pulled the lever for Romney. But I definitely remember thinking back in 2012, Romney's got this in the bag. There's no way that Obama is reelectable. Right? And then Obama won, and I was kind of shocked because I was so sure that he would lose. So sure of it. All of the polls that I had read indicated to me that Obama would lose and that Romney would become the 45th president of the United States in 2012. And that didn't happen. And at first I was shocked and I was upset, but I didn't let the disappointment of that election get me down. And that's the key. I still kept on podcasting, and in fact, at the time, there were a lot of other teenage conservatives out there who had kind of jumped on the Tea Party movement bandwagon. That was kind of how they got their start, and that was kind of how I got my start, to be honest. And a lot of those Tea Party teenage conservatives at the time, a lot of them jumped ship. A lot of them jumped off the ship after the 2012 election. Some of them had good reasons for doing so, probably, but some of them dipped out because they were so sure that Romney was going to win, and they were staking their reputations on it. Right? And they had all these plans, that Romney was going to win and that it was going to be glorious, and then none of that stuff happened. It crippled a lot of them. And, it was really disappointing. At that point, I had only been 5 years into podcasting, but still, that was long enough to where I could have thrown in the towel if I had wanted to with political commentary. I was really disappointed, as much as anyone, that Romney lost in that election. I was. But then I also remembered that I love podcasting itself more than I ever loved the political stuff, right? Politics was just a subject that I was, knowledgeable about at the time because I was a fucking nerd that way, right? So politics was a topic that I could use, but the podcast itself was always the passion. Still is. And that's what I realized in 2012. And that's something that I've carried forward with me that really helped me out in 2016. And it's helped me out now too. Now, let me tell you something about 2016. 2016, I had a very strange mindset because I remember on election day, on the eve of election day, so the night before election day 2016, I remember I tuned into Donald Trump's final campaign rally, which I think was either in Michigan or Pennsylvania at the time, but I can't remember off the top of my head. And I remember listening to him. And if you guys know my story, you know that I wasn't the biggest fan of Trump at first, but that I had said, as Andrew Breitbart once famously said, I will vote for whoever the Republican candidate is, because if we don't, the left wins. Right? So that was my impotence for voting for Trump. It wasn't necessarily because I liked Trump. It was because I hated Hillary more. Although, since then I actually have come to, like Trump for the way he handles the media and whatnot. Yeah, I get the criticisms of his personality and whatnot, but overall, I found him to be actually a pretty good president. All that aside, though, going back to, election night eve, I remember watching that rally and thinking, well, he's probably not going to win because Hillary probably has it rigged. But it's been one hell of a ride, and this will be, this will just be more stuff for me to comment on the podcast, on the Whitfield Report. So I kind of went in with a losing attitude, right, with regards to Election Day 2016. So when the results actually came in, and I've told this story on the podcast too before, it was so exhilarating that, quite honestly, folks, I don't think I even went to bed that night. I was so amped up. I couldn't believe it that Trump had won. For conservatives, it truly was a miracle, in a sense. And I still consider it to be one. And God willing, it happens again, but it might not. And so, this has got me thinking how I'm going to react after the election. Right? And the bottom line is, regardless of who wins, I'm still going to keep doing this podcast for as long as I can for you guys, because we've built an audience, we've built a community, and we're starting to build, a support community over on Patreon as well, which I'll get to at the end of the show. But this podcast has outgrown just politics for me. It's gone beyond that. now I not only cover that, but, I cover, some comedy. I do just some funny bits with my friends. I just shoot the breeze and talk about life on this podcast. Um, Apex Gamma and I will get together for an episode of the Gamma Hug Box, whatever, which is usually featured, in this feed, and we'll just shoot the breeze or talk about, whatever. Sometimes I'll just come on here and talk about, movies or music, or do what I'm doing right now and just bear my thoughts to you guys in a somewhat coherent / incoherent rant, right? And I just bare my soul to you guys, and that's what this podcast is. That's what it has evolved to after, 14, 13, almost 14 years now. And that's going to be the way it goes until I can no longer do this podcast. And I hope I'll be able to do this podcast until I'm 50 or 60. Not only do I hope I can keep doing that, but I hope that this podcast can actually take off and actually, become more monetizable than it is. It already is monetized, but believe me, I have ambitions to take this show and this podcast in bigger directions, but I'm going to do it in a good way. I'm not going to become a grifter, as much as I can. I'm going to avoid becoming a grifter or just another salesman to do it. I'm going to do it my way. But more than that, more than the podcast, ladies and gentlemen, and more than school or, my career after school, after I graduate or anything else, after the election, regardless of what happens, I'm going to do my best to treat people with decency and respect and kindness where I can. I'm not saying that everyone is going to, be deserving of those things, and I'm certainly not a, kumbaya, let's all hold hands, and sing peace songs. I'm definitely not that type, and you guys know that about me for sure if you've been listening. But I'm not a hostile guy. I'm not intentionally an asshole. If I'm an asshole, it's usually because if I'm an asshole, like if I'm trying to be an asshole, let's say, that's a better way to put it. If I'm trying to be an asshole, it's usually because it's part of a joke or a bit or something, or I'm just giving one of my friends or someone I like a hard time, right? And most people, especially most guys, are that way. But at the end of the day, I'm going to continue to try and love people and be there for the people I care about, regardless of the election's outcome. And folks, I would ask the same of you. And I know that's easier said than done for some of you, believe me. In fact, I know a couple members of this audience, specifically of the podcast audience, and I'm not going to say who they are, but some listeners have emailed me, through the website contact form, and have told me stories about how, their aunt or their uncle or, their parents in some cases even, have disowned them for being Trump supporters. And that to me is crazy, that we've gotten to this point in this country where anyone in America would disown someone and disown a family member for simply having different, for voting for someone different in an election. But again, this all goes back to the super polarization of everything, where everyone on the far right is a neo-Nazi, and everyone on the left is nothing but a dirty, rotten, stinking, fucking Antifa communist. And there's no middle ground in between whatsoever. There aren't any nuances. It's become that polarized in America, and that saddens me. So, if Trump wins, to my fellow conservatives, I would encourage you to still be decent, or at least do your very best to be decent and respectful towards those family and friends who may have voted for Biden. If you can be. Because I understand that's not always easy if they're being hostile. But do your best. Likewise, if we lose, be the bigger man or be the bigger woman and shake the hand of the person. Maybe the person who is voting for Biden this go around is the same, aunt or uncle who disowned you the last time. If that's the case, be the bigger person and just shake their hand. And, congratulate them if you can. If you're in a situation to be able to, be the bigger person. That's all I'm asking is, regardless of where you come from, ladies and gentlemen, treat each other with decency and respect after the election, and in all things. And also, like I said, I've got the podcast that I'm going to keep working on, and I've got school and other things, and I'm going to keep, working on all those things in my life after the election. And I'm going to keep improving myself as best I can. Is politics going to, influence some of it? Yeah, maybe, possibly. But as long as the system is still functioning, I'm going to do the best I can to get the stuff that I need to get done, and help, others out where I can. And that's that. And, that's my plan. And hopefully this audience shares that same mindset, because let me tell you something else, ladies and gentlemen. And this is something that my mom and I, we went out for dinner on Tuesday night, last night, when you're hearing this. We went out to dinner last night, and, COVID restrictions are less in Florida. They're not as enforced, but there are still lots of people who are wearing masks and whatnot. But we went out to a restaurant, which was enjoyable because we don't go out to begin with much anyway. And then with the whole, COVID thing, forget about it, you know. But we went out last night, and it was nice just to see other people out in public and dining and whatnot. And I was kind of people watching at one point, and I lean over to my mom and I say to my mom, I told her, I said, Mom, there are a lot of people who think that after the election is over, for whatever reason, that this COVID thing is going to go away. And, she and I began talking about it, and we both came to the conclusion that, folks, whether you like or not, this COVID thing isn't going to go away. Like I said, has been overhyped by the left and by the mainstream media, absolutely. Has been used to, do really unethical, shitty things that violate our rights. Yeah, unfortunately. But, I do believe the virus is real. I don't think it's as bad as we want to believe, but it's still, it's still out there. And listen, I don't think it's going to go away. Regardless of who becomes president, it's not going to go away. That I can tell you. We're going to be dealing with this COVID thing for at least another year minimum. I would venture to say that. And it could be even longer. And I will say this, if Joe Biden wins, things are going to get a lot more restrictive. We're probably going to get locked down again as a nation, and the lockdowns will probably be more severe. Who knows what's coming down the pike? But like I said, I don't think this thing is going away anytime soon. So the other important thing to do is, regardless of the election, try and keep your head up and keep your spirits high as best you can, because we still have a storm to weather, and I'm hoping it'll pass. I'm assuming it will. I don't know when, but me being an optimistic person, I would like to think it'll pass sooner rather than later. But it may pass later. Who knows? Regardless, we've got to stay optimistic. We've got to do our thing, whatever that might be for you. And, just support each other. Keep your head down, but, also keep your chin up in a weird way. And folks, that's that. And I can't think of anything else, folks. It, hasn't been a full hour yet, but I think 45 minutes is a good place to stop. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for listening to the Wednesday edition of the Whitfield Report. And if you're listening to this on Wednesday morning, when I release it, which hopefully you are, I will be on the Gamma Secret Kings review podcast with E Scorpio and Apex Gamma live tonight at 10 p.m. But we will also be doing a hybrid of that, so we'll be combining the Gamma Hug Box and the Gamma Secret Kings review. So I'll be live streaming as well, 10 p.m. on YouTube as well. It'll be the same show, but you'll either be able to go to E Scorpio's channel on D Live, my channel on D Live, or my YouTube channel. Or you can also watch on Periscope, and then the GSK audio, or I guess the Gamma Hugbox audio, will be posted the next day on Thursday, or I might start posting them on Friday, because that's usually when I do the Gamma Hugbox podcast. So be on the lookout for that. If you can tune in tomorrow, or tonight live, I guess, please do so. That's tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern on the Whitfield Report YouTube channel or the Whitfield Report D Live channel, whatever that is. So be on the lookout for that. If you can't, audio podcast for that will be out on Friday most likely. So, be on the lookout for that. And then, like I said, I'll try and fix the audio for, last week's Saturday show and get that uploaded in the back catalog if I can. But again, no guarantees. So, maybe we'll just do the regular Saturday show on Saturday and go from there. But until then, folks, I want to thank you for listening. And the other thing is, I will be releasing my first ever exclusive Patreon podcast this week as well, and that is called The Savage Express with Sam Whitfield, where I can talk a little bit more freeform about stuff like music and television and not have to worry about the YouTube censors or the podcast platform censors nagging me for content. I can actually play the content on there and speak a little bit more openly and do stuff for you guys on Patreon that I can't before. I'll run a Patreon ad at the end of the podcast so you guys can get more deals, details about that. But anyway, subscribe. It's only $3 a month for, supporting the podcast and getting the bonus exclusive Patreon podcast, again, The Savage Express. And I'm looking forward to it. So if you guys are interested, go over to patreon.com/Whitfield Report and sign up there. And yeah, folks, I think that concludes this podcast. So again, I want to thank you all for listening. I'm Sam Whitfield here for the Whitfield Report from all of us here at NGC Studios, wherever you are in the past, present, future hour. God bless, God save this great nation, God, freedom, legacy, in that order, as my friend Mr. John Neary likes to say. And I will see you on the next episode of the Whitfield Report podcast. Thanks, folks. Well, folks, with the Whitfield Report in its 5th season and me starting my 14th year of podcasting in 2021, I figured now would be as good time as any to start a Patreon page for the podcast. And I know everyone these days has a Patreon page who is a podcaster, but let me tell you what you're going to get if you decide to join the Whitfield Report Patreon. At the $1 level, you'll simply be contributing. That'll simply be a way of saying thank you, and I appreciate it. But that's that. However, at the $3 level on up, you're going to be getting access to an exclusive podcast that I'm hoping to do weekly called the Savage Express podcast. And on that podcast, exclusive to Patreon subscribers and supporters, I'll be covering music and movies and pop culture and personally and anecdotes in ways that I can't cover on YouTube or traditional podcast platforms. I'm hoping to do this every week. I might not, but it'll certainly be a longer form podcast for those types of topics if you're interested in that sort of thing. And I also might be re-releasing some episodes of the Whitfield Analysis, my old podcast, re-releasing the back catalog, as it were, digging out some old video clips that I've had in archive for years and posting all of that exclusively to the Patreon site for you guys. It's going to be a good time, and there are a couple of different tiers you can join in at. I understand if you can't join the Patreon, but if you're able to financially support the show and you want to help out, joining the Patreon would be the best way to do that. So I encourage you to go to patreon.com/Whitfield Report and sign up on one of the tiers today. And again, folks, I want to thank you for supporting the podcast. Thank you for listening to the podcast. And hopefully, I can look forward to your financial contribution, which I deeply appreciate as well. God bless, folks, and Godspeed amongst thee in that order.